I honestly don't know what I'm going to say about these chapters because I just didn't expect them. So we are reading Queen's Play by Dorothy Dunnett, part 3, the final 4 chapters. So the rest of part 3, which are 4 very short chapters that take up like that much of the book. And I just realized that part 4 actually takes up like a third of the book, which explains why we're doing 4 chapters all at once. And so this is the part where we get, it opens after Lymond has been terribly injured. It opens in London with Lymond, who has just decided to go to London because he's staying with, obviously, the Lennoxes. I'm sure that Margaret and, who is it, Matthew Lennox? I'm pretty sure they are, because they love having people at their house and guests so that they can get gossip and spy through their guests. But Lymond knows about Margaret Douglas or Margaret Lennox being someone connected to Lymond, but he's kind of hating on Lymond right now, so he's just like, he'd probably shrug his shoulders at it anyway. But I'll get to more of that later. There's a great line here where Lymond is just chilling, riding through London, and he's just like, no one's looking at me anymore. Like, no one's turning their head, and it's because Taddy Boys are next to him. Under the soft body and the sandy pelt there lurked, horrifically transparent as a jellyfish, a grey, inferior personality with whom he might have to live all his days. Oh, that burns. The Lymond had sloughed off Francis Crawford, but he was not happy in his new skin. I think, yeah, Lymond was just kind of hiding behind Lymond a little bit, behind his personality. He goes to Bryce Harrison's house, and Harrison is like all not interested in the Irish. You get a bit of an insight into how the Irish really were kind of treated like dogs. And then, so he gets rejected, and then he sees that Robin Stewart's horse was in the stables at Harrison's, and goes to spy on them. There's a cute little scene here on page 244 where he dismounts down the street to leave the horses with his follower while he slipped over 2 walls and down an alley, soothed an inquisitive dog, and dodged at last into the garden of Bryce Harrison's stylish Strand house. So he's like trying to be like all 007 spy, but he's like, ooh, a doggy. I must get the doggy. Or maybe the dog was actually just going to bark at him and he was just like, shh, shh. Anyway, it's cute either way. And he then finds out that Robin Stewart is the baddie. So we get confirmation of that. Robin Stewart is so confident that he's killed Lymond, and one would be. It is kind of crazy that Lymond has survived that poisoning. I don't know at this point if Lymond is immediately feeling bad for Lymond, because a lot of things might be clicking into his mind about Lymond's behaviour in those last moments where they kind of had a falling out. Like, he was poisoned the night that Lymond was like throwing stuff at him. And then some time passes. Margaret Lennox catches on that Lymond is doing something. Lymond goes to spy on another meeting. Honestly, I'm very confused about the whole thing with Warwick, the Earl of Warwick, and what exactly Warwick was trying to do with this plot. So what happens is that Robin thinks he's got a thing going on with Harrison, but then Harrison's like, does a Robin on Robin by selling Robin out to the French ambassador? Yeah, the French ambassador. Ambassador de Kimmel. I think that's how you say it. And I thought that was rather neat. Except now we find out that Lymond is fine and he's back in England, and we don't get any of what happened afterwards. He's just like, boom, in England. He's now like some sort of messenger for the Queen, and he's very well dressed and he's got a different name. Lymond goes and talks to Harrison on chapter 5. So lots of things happen in these 4 short chapters. If someone can just give me a 1-paragraph explanation as to what the hell why wasn't Warwick giving up Robin Stewart to the French? Why didn't Robin just give him up? So Lymond meets up with Harrison, and they have this big discussion where Lymond is trying to find out where Robin Stewart is, mainly because Lymond is just like, I want to get to this guy. Harrison is just quite a self-serving guy. He just wants to get out alive, but he's also trying to... Once again, he also says, "You devil, whoever you are, I don't want you." Also calls Lymond a devil. This is just the way that it goes. This is a joke at this point as to how many times he's been called a devil. And then Harrison gets let out and dobs Robin Stewart in. And Robin thinks everything's going to plan, and then suddenly realizes that it's not. He's going to be in a lot of trouble, probably killed, and then he kills Harrison. I just am struggling to understand exactly like the politics of what happened with all of this. And I enjoyed it, but it was just like, what is going on here? I'm going to have to reread it to figure this out at some point. Or you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to listen to the Lymond Book Club, and then I will know for sure exactly what's happening. Which I haven't done for these chapters, which is probably my biggest mistake. So then we have the scene. This was my favourite scene. This was basically at the end of part 3, where Lymond reveals himself as alive to Lymond at the same time that he reveals himself in the flesh to Margaret Lennox, and the reactions from both of them are so funny. We have Lymond saying, he was a crazy fellow with a devil at him, regarding Lymond, another devil reference, like 3 pages later. Margaret's just trying to get all this information about like how Tatty Boy Bella was. I'm sure Margaret at this point definitely knows that it was Lymond. And Lymond doesn't seem to really care about saying much because Lymond thinks that Lymond is dead at this point. But then the doors open, and in the shadows a man came to stand, fair, lightly made, and dimly sparkling. I mean, obviously there's no way that this is going to be anyone else than Lymond with how it's described, because we know Dunnett very well. Like a crystal half seen in the dark. How beautiful is that line? A young page carrying a baton at his back. How kind, Lady Lennox, says Lymond. There's like a really heart-clenching moment where Margaret looks at Francis and he doesn't see a herald, but sees an untouched boy's face of 8 years before and another, more recent, with the new hammer shapes of leadership plainly on it. Oh my gosh. Margaret is thinking back to like 16-year-old Lymond and being like, wow, he's like a man now. Because when you first meet someone when they're a child, it's really hard for them to grow up in your mind because they're always younger than you, or they're always that first impression you had of them. But now I think she's coming to realize. Because then she says, and now here was a face she had never quite seen, circumstances that she did not know, an intellect she recognized. She recognized Lymond's intellect because they have a similar intellect. An illness he could not easily hide, pressed and frozen together into a detachment as dark and icy as Lymond's was, for example, shallow and warm. Alright, so Margaret and Lymond are a match made in heaven. I said this last book, but they really are. Sorry, match made in hell, but they're still meant for each other. I laughed out loud at this scene where where Lymond's like, introduce us, and Margaret's like, Mr. Francis Crawford, she is rubbing us in. The Lymond, Prince of Barrow and Lord of the Sleeve Bloom in Ireland. And Lymond is like, That's a really silly name for a monkey because he's like holding the monkey and was like, introduce the monkey to me. That was so funny. Did anyone else laugh at that? That was really funny. Even though it's such a dad joke, it was really funny. And it's at that point that it's just before then that Olimar actually realizes who Lymond is. Then Lymond and Margaret are just chatting in their typical passive aggression, and Margaret being like, don't work so hard, Francis. Silly little boy that you are. Olimar is just like, Olimar, multiple things have happened. He's getting betrayed by Margaret Lennox. He has just seen the ghost of Teddy Boy Bella come in front of him, and now he's caught between Margaret and Lymond fighting together, and he's like, I don't want to be here. Get me out of here. This is an old lover's quarrel. I don't want to be here. But he's so shocked. His senses roar as a burned man's on the side where Francis Crawford was seated. What a brilliant line. You know when you are really hyper aware of a particular person, they sit down next to you, like maybe when you were younger and your crush walked into the room and sat down and you forever just felt like there was fire on that side of your body because you were like, oh my god, that person is there, oh my gosh, and you just always like hyper aware of them even though you might not even be looking at them. That's what Olimar is like with Francis Crawford. Sorry, that was probably too much information. Margaret manages to recover all of her serenity, but she was definitely shocked at seeing Francis just walk in. Like initially her unusually bleached good looks had given way to a sudden queer heightening of her splendor. She drew a long, unsteady breath. The air became abruptly quite dead. So when Margaret saw Francis walk into the room, there would have been multiple things going through her head, but one of them would have been Francis could just kill her right there. Like that might always be at the back of her head, but surely she knows that Lymond would never do that. Because she must know, and this is the reason she has a one-up on Francis, is that he is not a murderer for the sake of just murdering, unlike her. So, and this is why people who are happy to murder can always have that extra step ahead of people who are good, because they don't have that guilt weighing them down. And anyway, we're proven because she then kills her own monkey pet. Don't know why she has that monkey. Was that popular back in those days? Lymond even says, some love for a living and some kill. Oh my god. And then he gives her back the dead monkey. We need way more scenes between Lymond and Margaret. So then Olimar goes back with Lymond and is really unhappy about everything. But it's interesting because they get back to this inn. Lymond is sort of just lying flat like a schoolboy under his feet, just sort of listening to Olimar talk for a bit. Lymond tries to convince Olimar to go and talk to Robin on his behalf, to convince Robin to give up his employer, and then drops a bomb on Olimar that if Robin doesn't give it up, then Una's going to have to be the one that gives it up. And that makes Olimar agree to go and talk to Robin, and goes and find Robin. We find out that Robin has tried to kill himself multiple times, which is, I find a little bit wild. Like I thought maybe Robin, because he's so selfish, that he would just continue to hold on to the last minute, but he genuinely has tried to kill himself. So he's very ashamed, I think, Robin, of what he's done, which is fair enough, absolutely fair enough, because he should be ashamed. I mean, also, I have so many thoughts about Robin's character development as to, like, he came so close to being good, but then fell all the way back onto the other side, finally thought he was going to get out, and then he was betrayed by people just like himself. And Robin's thoughts, when we're in Robin's POV, there's a lot of that thought about it, you know, just because he was born as a nobody, he didn't have a name or a title. If he had a name or a title, things would be different and he would have been able to progress a little bit further. And it's fascinating because now Francis Crawford doesn't have a name or a title. He has more money than Robin, but he doesn't have a title. Like, you could argue that, hey, Lymond wasn't the firstborn, and he still managed to make himself a huge reputation, notorious and good. But it's absolutely true that twofold. Lymond wouldn't have been able to do a lot of things if he didn't have access to the education that he had as a son of a baron, and also access to the wealth. And two, Lymond's actions of like doing what he did and betraying Scotland, but he didn't betray Scotland, but like apparently betraying Scotland back in the war, wouldn't have been nearly as shocking if he wasn't the son of a baron either. So like he was definitely able to get a name to himself by the juxtaposition of of all the terrible things he did and his birth. Robin is right. Like, it's just so clever how to the very end I am definitely able to sympathize with Robin, even though I definitely think he's overstepped things. Of course, he like murdered Lymond. How can we forgive that? Well, he attempted to murder Lymond. Gosh, Olimro and Lymond, I just want to say the conversations that they have, I always forget that Olimro is so sharp. He is bright. It's so easy to lull yourself into a sense that he isn't. And definitely Olimro is naive in politics. Like, he obviously got fooled and followed by the Lennoxes and didn't really pay attention there. But that's just, I think, because he's not used to this world. He's like a child, but he's kind of like where Lymond was 8 years ago, probably. But Olimro says, "You're so damned brilliant." This is to Lymond. "You know everything. It's hard set you'd be to give yourself a dull Saturday afternoon." Very true, Olimro. Lymond would never be able to sit still. He is ADHD maxed out. "And we're all puppets to you, not the old queens only, but the rest of us, man, woman and child, looking the fools of the world." And then Lymond replies, "Not of my making." His eyes in the full light were animal bright. So Lymond basically agrees that, yeah, he totally plays people, but also the fact that everyone looks like fools isn't his fault. Because he thinks people are fools. That's how I've interpreted this. It was amazing. Lymond, you absolute snob. "Not of my making that everyone looks like fools, hey?" And Olimro then says, "You have them all curled tight to your littlest finger." Yeah, Lymond the puppet master. We also find out that Lymond is like really well dressed. Like, he's got jewels in his ears and rings on his fingers. And I've never actually had Lymond described dressed like this before. Obviously not in this book where he's been Tatty Boy, but he's never been described as dressed like this even in Game of Kings ever. Like, he's been like a rogue on the loose. So wow, like, we have Lymond dressing in his station as their vassal. That's very attractive. Thank God he wasn't always like that. I would have fallen way too quickly. Olimro basically chucks at Lymond's entire existential dilemma, which is, "There is not the least heart in me to see him rolling fish cold and choking in the great godly stream of Francis Crawford's duty." Which I completely agree with, because Lymond basically throws duty at Olimro, saying like, you know, protect the young girl, get this out of Robin Stewart or it'll be Una, this is my duty. Lymond, I feel like Lymond is hiding behind this to a point. The godly stream of Francis Crawford's duty, though, I'm sorry, but what an amazing line. It definitely makes you feel as a reader like, definitely it feels like Francis or Lymond throws the word duty around when it suits him, maybe, like he's hiding behind it. Like, I genuinely think Lymond doesn't want to see the young Queen Mary dead, but that's not necessarily just because of duty, is it? But no one can really challenge you when you say duty. And then, so Olimro goes up to Robin, and they chat. Essentially, Robin is just despondent and not really trusting anyone, but then Olimro says, "Well, why don't we expose Tatty Boy in France? Tell me everything and I'll help you expose him," which I think is a little bit rough on Olimro. Like, I don't think Olimro has him in it to do that. But he wants to protect Una, so he's doing what he can to get this out of Robin Stewart. And Robin Stewart tells him, and then we find out we don't find out on paper how that is, but then we find out everyone's going to go back to France, including the Earl of and Countess of Lennox and the Marquis of Northampton. So when I saw John Stewart's or Lord Daubigne's name on the paper, I was just not surprised, but also just, I don't know. It wasn't like, I didn't have the same, like, oh, no way, like I did with Andrew Hunter. This one I was kind of like, It didn't feel satisfying. It didn't feel like things were clicking into place. I don't know, it just didn't feel super, super satisfying. Like there wasn't enough, you know, when something clicks into place and you're like, oh, and that makes sense, and that makes sense, and that makes sense. Maybe if I go back and read it, it will feel more satisfying, but I just didn't have the same satisfaction. And you know what? Maybe it's because I'm disappointed in Lymond. Like, Lymond never liked Lord Daubigny to start with. Why didn't Lymond focus more on him than Robin Stewart? Because Lymond knew already that Robin Stewart isn't going to be the mastermind because Robin's dumb. Why didn't he focus more on Lord Daubigny? Because he was drunk and partying the whole time. What the hell, Lymond? Like, what the actual hell? Lymond actually just wasted 6 months just kind of shoving this into a corner. I don't know. This book is frustrating. I don't know if anyone else got frustrated reading these last chapters. It could just be a me thing. I will say I'm very excited to read on to part 4 because I think that's going to be the real climax. This just feels like a false climax that we got here. So we head back to France to Dieppe. I will see you then.